One. And here we go. Welcome to Chapter 2 of Global Business. Publisher is Cengage. Author is Peng. Formal institutions, politics, laws, and economics. All right. Welcome aboard, everyone. Grab your favorite beverage and let's get started. I'm choosing to go with tea today. Objectives. Touching on the higher points, the institutions themselves, the views, quick overview of the different types of organizations each country has as far as how they are governed, how laws are created or the different type of laws that are followed, property rights and why they're important, quick overview of different types of economies that you'll be dealing with, and back to the particular laws. The reason that we're covering this particular section is the things that you will probably face as you are working internationally. Understanding the particular institutions. As always, this is not a substitute for you reading and other studies. This is meant to be a supplement. We will be going over and I will be mentioning the slides and the pages for those who are at home following on a textbook. Now we're going to go over the first open case, which is Australia against Facebook, which is an interesting topic. Now, we're going to be just highlighting a couple of terms so you have a decent understanding of what we're talking about. The institution itself, which I believe should have been first since everything after it has the word institution, and it's institutional short is just the rules of the game. They are formal and informal, meaning formal, those are things you can look up. Everyone can see them. They're usually found somewhere in a book or some type of legal document. Informal are just customs. Certain rules that you have to abide by that everyone in that area knows. And if you are a foreigner to that particular area, you need to also understand the informal rules as well. You don't want to insult anyone. There are institutional rules that have been there, and they can be formal or informal. Institutional based views, which you as a firm need to understand, because those things, again, you may not see them, which is the worst thing that can happen, or you may not understand them, but you have to be aware that there are certain rules you need to go by. And the framework, still going back to whether or not they're formal or informal, is how you, the business, will react to them. It doesn't mean that you have to agree, but you at least need to understand what they are. Moving on to slide 5. Some examples of this. And we're on the bottom of page 37. Again, formal. These are things you can probably look up. There are certain rules. Non or informal rules. Do any research on certain things to do if you're vacationing somewhere in a foreign country. It's probably one of the first things you'd want to do to understand certain rules are not, certain things are not allowed. They are customs. I believe in certain countries you're not allowed to chew gum in public because they're afraid that you're going to leave the gum on the ground and leave the place untidy. I think that is something in Hong Kong, if I remember correctly. There may be a fine, maybe you could look that up, but it is more of a cultural norm. So be aware of those things if you're doing business in another area. Just reaffirming and making sure you understand regulatory issues, you have to abide by certain laws. Certain areas, driving on the left side of the road compared to the right side of the road in the United States. Again, certain issues that come into play. The informal, dining in certain restaurants. The United States has a habit of tipping. in many parts of the world, that is considered an insult. Who eats first? Who pours the tea? Other things, little bitty things that would upset people in that particular culture. You think about it, there may be things that you figure are norm, but there are more informal institutions in your particular area. Someone not familiar with that area would look and go, ooh, no, that's not a good thing. That is a definite no no. So just be aware of those. The normative, again, cultural things, the internal ones are the ones that are truly not written, and they're occasionally more localized. It could be in the same country, but different areas have different rules. In the US, one of the more interesting things is it referred to as soda or pop? I keep thinking of more things related to food. Some areas you would be seen as committing blasphemy to add sugar to grits or oatmeal. Some areas it's fine. Certain areas it is bad form to put ketchup on a hot dog. Just little bitty nuances may or may not make a major difference, but you should be aware of that. So, what do the institutions do in and of themselves? And we're on page 38. The major thing that the institutions do is they make sure you reduce certain uncertainties. These are what the rules are if you didn't know. The idea is that you must find out what those rules are so you don't make a mistake. Any faux pas would be very, very bad for you. You're trying to cut down on these other particular situations. Transaction cost. What will it be for you to do business somewhere else? There may be certain licenses you need to pay for. Again, the institutional rules. At some point, they're there to avoid opportunism, seen as a totally bad thing, looking after your own interest. Well, if you ever had an economics class, that's probably one of the first chapters you have to understand. Most people are looking after their own best interest. Doesn't mean you're looking to harm anybody in any way, but you are looking to get the best deal available to you. Understanding that when we refer to certain transactional economies, there are a lot of things that go on off the books that happen. Particularly if we're talking about competition. Now, in some instances, everyone knows what the costs are. Some instances, you pay under the table for certain things. Now, looking how we go a little further, there are different ways to look upon these as an institutional view. You're wishing to do business somewhere in Asia. You need to understand the rules of the road. And a quick view on that is how's the institution in, say, South Korea, how your firm and how that will affect how your firm acts. One of the things I have come across in Japan, it is seen as a bad sign to actually have tattoos, any tattoos. They're associated with the local gang, mafia, whatever you want to call them, akusa. If you have a tattoo and you're going to Japan, you might want to cover it up. Just don't let people see it. It is seen as a bad thing. You are part of a violent gang. Now, they know foreigners don't follow that rule, but it's still seen as bad form. So how you want to act, again, you may have a few people who are doing business for you overseas, or you're being told to go somewhere. You might want to find out what those rules are, and your company should adapt appropriately. Core prepositions for an institutional based. There's the firm's rational pursuit, again, making a profit based upon the restrictions, formal and informal. While proposition 2, while they're informal, combining with the government behavior, their constraints and play a much larger role in reducing this quote-unquote uncertainty and whether or not you can or cannot do these things. As we've discussed, You need to understand the rules of the land. It's not your backyard that you are playing in. We're on page 40. The global view. You must understand, again, what you can and cannot do. The non marketing aspects are huge. What you consider to be culturally fine in your country may not be elsewhere. If we're still going back to Japan, after work they enjoy going out, possibly to drink. And if you've ever heard the story, I'm not sure they still do this, but they tend to enjoy karaoke. And it would be bad form you not to do the karaoke, even if you can't sing. Understand it's late, maybe someone's had a few drinks, they probably won't hear you anyway. But what is norm for them would be better for you in order to be accepted in a particular culture. Moving on to everyone's favorite topic, political systems. Now, basically, there are a couple of simple political systems, one extreme or the other, and everything in between. Primary political system in the US and many of the countries that they do business with is a democracy where people elect those to act on their behalfs in the government. On the other extreme is when you have a person or a party, usually a small group, who are controlling everything. There's a blend somewhere in the middle where at some point you need someone to make decisions, and then you have representative government as well. And authoritarianism is not quite as bad as totalitarianism, but it is still a concentration of government. The little bit of semantics is important. You just have to understand what is going on. You may find out you don't even want to deal with that particular political system, then you simply move on. But you should be aware of that before you decide to go to another country. Again, the political risk of a faux pas, you actually doing something that would be considered negative in somewhere else based upon the political narratives. In other textbooks, and possibly in this one, especially in political science, they'll talk about places where it is completely totalitarian. The best example usually thrown in a textbook is North Korea, where the current leader, Kim Jong-un, has posters all over the place. There are stories of visitors to the country. Most people don't go, and it's difficult to get in there. Took a poster down as a souvenir and was immediately arrested. You should know where you are at. And as the saying goes, when in Rome, act as a Roman. Legal systems in different countries have different outcomes. And we're moving on to page, nice story, new political issues, 46 in your textbook. Slide 16. In legal systems, there are usually three common forms of legal systems or how you act. Primary one just happens to be simple statutory rules that are put in place, written down as time goes on. The other are common laws, which has precedence for things that just have been for as long as anyone remembers, and they become laws. So one may come into existence because of a change or a need. The other one is just purely tradition. If we're still talking about politics, in the US, they usually hold major elections in November, federal elections. You would need a change in civil law if you wish to actually mail in your votes. And there's our change. The third one is based on particular religion or religious teachings, or traditions might be a better word. These are things that have been done based on that, and they're totally different than what we would consider just used for trade and commerce. And if you're looking again around the world, for quite some time, women weren't allowed to vote. In some places, that still might be the case. That would be more of a religious tradition, and then it simply becomes culture, and you move on from there. We'll give some examples of what happens in different countries and how they are based. As you can see, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The reason that you'll notice, again, for the U.S. listeners, common law based on a little bit of tradition. There are civil laws in the U.S. as well, so it's a little bit of both, but which one is more predominant? Because U.S. law tends to follow English law, and a lot of English law was based on just prior tradition. This is where you get that. And if you're looking again in certain other countries, you'll notice it weighs a little bit more in the Middle East as far as theocratic law. The legal system is up next. Slide 19. Property rights, or IP, intellectual rights. This is important because if you're going into another country, you need to find out what you can and cannot do and what are your rights as you are bringing a product in. And what do we mean by this? If you create it, do you have the right to control it? Now, you're looking at some of the main parts of intellectual property rights. A patent usually is a product, something that you physically have. Usually, again, it's not absolute. Copyrights refer to things that are less tangible, music, art, and things like that. Trademarks focus mainly on the brand itself, the name, the image, and things like that. Does the country you wish to work with have these rights? Again, someone can't profit from your particular device. You invent the better mousetrap or whatever it may be, and someone just blatantly uses it, not paying you any royalties or things of that nature. You may not want to do business in that particular area. Economic systems. Now, if you had any business class, usually they're going to get around to the basic economic systems, maybe something that you've seen if you've had an econ class. But if you haven't, we're going to go through that. Economic systems on the extremes, a market system or an open system. You're allowed to do almost any type of business you want within reason, of course. So, you're not allowed to get a business that is considered illegal by that particular country. But you're allowed to sell and abide by the rules, and you can make as much of it you want. It doesn't matter. If you can't sell it, then you're probably going to have a loss, but you're allowed by law to make as many widgets as you can afford to make. In a command system on the other extreme, it is strictly controlled by one central entity, usually whatever government is in charge, or again, it could be some structure, because if it's a focus more in a religious country, then it's not government, but it is an entity. They will tell you how many widgets to make. You can only have so many Starbucks in this area. You can't put a McDonald's here because we said so. That kind of thing. Most countries have a bit of a mix. You cannot put Starbucks and McDonald's anywhere you want to. They have to be certain areas that are zoned for that. You cannot put a McDonald's in the middle of a elementary school. What am I looking for? In the middle of an elementary school playground. So there are limitations. And usually you don't find too many places that are purely command systems. That goes back to North Korea. Finding a system that is purely open-ended or the invisible hand, where there are no rules, you probably don't want to find that, because it goes back to intellectual property, and you do need some type of central organization, usually a government, to put up rules and abide by those rules. This is what the courts are for. So, how much of one versus the other simply depends on the region. A little bit about debates and extensions. We are all the way on page 53, and we're on slide 25. Just some simple examples of state-owned businesses versus private business. The objective of a private business is to make a profit. A state-owned is actually to provide a service that maybe the private business doesn't want. Either it's not profitable to a private business and it's needed, or it would simply cost too much for the consumer. Now, one illustration or this, or two, as a matter of fact, internet providers. Company wants to put up all the infrastructure to have an internet signal in an area, and it may not be profitable enough because it's a small area and no one wants to do that. So that might be a reason why you have a state-owned enterprise do it. This is where the idea of which one is better comes in. Most textbooks will say it's better to have a private business, but again, you may want to have state-owned just to make sure everyone has access to it. A good example in the U.S. is the post office. The Postal Service, by federal law, has to deliver to everyone. Now, if they order from one of these large companies, Amazon and such, they may not want to deliver. They may actually pay the United States Postal Service to deliver at the last mile because it doesn't make economic sense to go 20 miles off-road to deliver to some small house, I don't know, a doggy sweater. At that point, they're going to farm the work out. So, saying that you don't need a state-owned enterprise, you may want to reevaluate that. Not saying it should be dominant, but it does have its purpose. And we're looking as to why they're established. That's an example. In financing, it's obviously financed either through shareholders if it's a private company, or through the government and maybe some other resources. What do you do if it's not working well in a private business? You close the doors. Some state-owned businesses, even if they're not making a profit, are simply too valuable to let go to the small number of people, or it may be too expensive to do it otherwise. In the United States, it would probably be cost prohibitive to have private water systems, private electricity, private sewer, and waste management. Now, there were stories, and I've read this, back in the day, the fire departments were privately owned. That would be a bit of a problem if your neighbor isn't paying for a fire company to come out and put his house out and you're next door. That may not work. Compensation for a private business is usually higher than public, so you have that. Problems you have with both, or one or the other, if you wish to look at it in that vein. You still have issues of moral hazards. Again, people looking after their own opportunities, even in a public area that happens and in a private area. You make more money in the private sector, but there are people who are in government institutions who are cooking the books, as it were, to make money for themselves. And you do run into the blended mix or hybrid between the two, depending on what's going on. All right, slide 28 and 29. You being in charge. What are you looking forward to doing with this information? Again, you need to find out what are the rules of the game depending on the country and make sure you adjust appropriately. One of my favorite stories of not understanding the local geography, as it were, the background of where it is. General Motors, the car company, had a car that was called the Vega. Not a bad name. However, they decided to sell the vehicle in Mexico. In Spanish, the word Vega means no go. That probably wasn't a good name for a car. So, understanding the lay of the land is a good thing for you as managers. Okay, that's most of Chapter 2, Formal Institutions, Politics, Laws, and Economics. All right, hopefully this is useful. Share, like, and all that other good stuff so we'll know. Anything different, always put that in the feedback. I'd appreciate that. All right then, happy studying, and I will talk to you next time. Have a good one.